Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Darnell Hunt, Director of the Bunche Center here at UCLA, and we're obviously thrilled to have Supervisor Yvonne Burke today to talk to us about her work, about a number of issues that are near and dear to us as we think about community here in Los Angeles and nationally. And as you may know, this visit is part of our Thurgood Marshall dinner and lecture, which is our annual fundraiser here at UCLA. And Supervisor Burke is our honoree this year. And so we're very proud to have her back home because those of you who don't know, she's an alumna of UCLA. So we're really happy to have her back here and to honor her in this way. I'd like to introduce Janira Teague, one of our second-year MA students who will formally introduce the supervisor.
Good afternoon, everybody. The Honorable Yvonne Burke was re-elected unopposed to her fourth-year term as Los Angeles County Supervisor for the 2nd District. She brings to the Board of Supervisors more than 30 years of experience and a distinguished public service career at the national and state as well as local government levels. As a member, she is focused on education of children, economic development, and transportation in her district. In the course of her long public service career, she became the first African-American woman elected to U.S. Congress in California in 1972, and the first to serve as chair of the LA County Board of Supervisors in 1993. Time magazine named her one of America's 200 future leaders, and she was selected as Woman of the Year by Los Angeles Times and Alumni of the Year by UCLA in 1996. The list of accomplishments go on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Yvonne Burke.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I have to apologize for being so late. I went in the wrong gate. Even though I come back here often, every time it's to a different building. And I did have an opportunity to serve as a regent at the University of California. And as I was coming in, I saw that there was a sign that said the regents were meeting. And it seems as though the same issues are coming up over and over again. And rather than kind of lecture to you, I can tell you a little bit about my background, but then we may want to talk about some of the issues that I think are really crucial, particularly to the African American community. I graduated from UCLA in political science. Then I went to USC Law School. Practiced law for some time, and I practiced a variety of different kinds of law. I'm one of those people that at first I just did whatever walked in the door, that kind of law. But ultimately, I became a deputy corporation commissioner, and later, after serving there, went back and did probate and real estate law. I ran for the assembly, which was my first office running, and it's kind of an interesting story. I ran not because I had planned on a big political career, but I happened to be on the staff of the McCone Commission that was investigating the Watts riots. And a group of us were looking at the issues and looking at many of the concerns. We were the people, the staff, who were writing this report and doing the investigation and all of the issues in terms of difficulty of people getting loans for their homes. The issues in terms of profiling then, it's just as it is today. Many of those other issues we were talking about. But one of the things that we found was that there was really no political leadership that could go into the riot area, because there was just an alienation of politicians. There was no, at that time, African-American member of the city council. There was an African-American who was a member of the assembly and a member of Congress. So they said, well, maybe we should try to run someone for the assembly, and said, well, we said for an office. But in the course of this, all of us talking, and in a little room where we were all doing our work, the person who was the assemblyman in my district retired. And he had designated his administrative assistant to take his place, who had then left his office and was working as a lobbyist for the savings and loan industry. So he had lots of money. And so it was just sort of a given that he was going to take the place. But part of what we did was a lot of analysis of the district in terms of the populations. And we came up with an analysis that an African American in the primary, if they could get a particular set of votes and could get the liberal white vote, would be able to take the primary. And if you could take the primary, the Democratic primary, since it was a 60% Democratic district, you had a very good chance of winning the election. So we started that organization. And I had grown up, I was in the civil rights movement. I had been very active in the movement. I had grown up in Los Angeles, so I had lots of friends. And I did very simple things, and we raised our money from cocktail parties and, things like that, not from any big, huge dinners. And we were able to put money together. I ran. What had happened was that the majority vote was split because there was a liberal candidate for what was called CDC, and Jess Unruh, who was at that time a big power, he had a candidate. His candidate was the savings and loan lobbyist. So they put a lot of money in, but they sort of took it for granted, never thinking that there could be possibly a grassroots campaign going on in the black community. And they didn't believe that there was enough African Americans to make a difference anyhow. Well, I won overwhelmingly in the primary. And then I ran against a John Birch member, and I don't know whether you know what that is, but there was at one time a very strong John Birch society that existed, particularly in areas, in conservative white areas. Westchester at that time was very conservative, and so he came from the Westchester area. And it was a terrible campaign, but I still won. And so I ran for the assembly. I won the assembly. I stayed there for 6 years. And then there was reapportionment. I got involved in the reapportionment and was able to select a district. So I ran for Congress. And again, I had a difficult campaign. This time I ran against someone I went to UCLA with, as a matter of fact, Judge Billy Mills at that time. He was not a judge. And, but I won the congressional seat. And I stayed there for 6 years. And many people ask me, why did I leave Congress? Well, I had a baby when I was in Congress. The first member of Congress to ever have a baby. And it wasn't that easy for me traveling back and forth and with a child when the child got ready to go to school. So I had to make some decisions. And as all of us in our lives, we have to make various decisions. I made a decision that I would rather come back to California because I had to serve the district, and I did not want to leave my child one place or the other. So that was a personal decision I made. I ran for Attorney General of California against George Duke Majan. I won the primary, but then I lost the election by 2 points, percentage points. So I went back to practicing law, and I practiced law for the next 12 years. Then, when Supervisor Hahn decided he would not run, he came to me and asked me if I would run, and that he would support me for supervisor. Again, I had a very difficult election against someone else who I went to UCLA with, Diane Watson, who we had the same maiden name. My name was Watson also, because Brathwaite's my prior married name. So it was a difficult campaign, but I did win a very close election, and that was 13 years ago. I've been a member of the Board of Supervisors now for 13 years. As some of you may know, I'm in my last term, not because I'm termed out, because I decided I'm going to do something else. And I think it's time for me to do something else. I've been there for 13 years. I'll be there 16 years when I finish the term in the end of 2008. And I want to do some other things at the end of my career. I said this was going to be the end of my career. But you know how that goes. You keep having different end of careers. End of careers every time. Every year you have a different end of career. So I am, but still very, very involved. Presently, I chair the Coliseum Commission, and as many of you know, trying to get a football team to Los Angeles. And as a matter of fact, I'm going back to meet with the NFL on May 2nd, and we'll be making our presentation to the NFL. Hopefully that they'll select us over Anaheim, and the Coliseum will have to be redone. So that's been taking a lot of my time. I've been working on that. I'm also, in May 1st, going to be the chair of Southern California Area Governments, which is involved in planning for the entire region. And all of the 167 cities belong to the area governments, as does San Bernardino, Los Angeles County, and Riverside County, and Ventura. So I will be chairing that for the next year, and that, of course, also is a challenging but exciting kind of endeavor. So while I'm coming to the end, I haven't wound down at all. I'm still very involved in a number of things. And I wanted to give time for you to ask me about some of the issues we're facing. But I want to tell you that as someone who went to UCLA, actually I started at Cal for 2 years and then came to UCLA. I am very concerned about the University of California and its ability to attract African American students. Because what happens, as I understand it, first of all, is that we have a crisis in terms of young people not being able to get out of high school. When we talk about, 60% of African American boys aren't graduating from high school, we have that crisis. And then we have the crisis of this tremendous kind of competition in order to get into the school that is affordable. And that's the real issue. It's really an issue today, it seems to me, of class that has happened. Because first of all, and I say this as having had a child who did go to a UC school, but getting into a UC school, I know what I had to do. I had to make sure she got her SAT scores. She had to get a preparation course. I had to make sure she got good grades in school. And these were things that I'm not sure that we have all of our parents prepared to be able to do. We're talking about many of the parents in my district don't even have a pencil in the house.
That's right.
They don't have a book in the house. And in addition to that, 49% of all the children in my district are raised by their grandparents. These are difficult realities. I have the largest number, even though it's changing, I have the largest number of foster children. There's now 26,000 children in foster care. That's low. It was 46,000 a few years ago. And we have, at this point, very close between my district and Gloria Molina's district. It used to be the second district had the largest amount. But what I see is that we do have a whole population that is not at an advantageous point of view. If you need all of those things to compete, if it's so difficult in a competitive environment, how do we provide that kind of preparation, particularly in our public school system? And particularly even when a student gets through that public school system and they want to go to college when it costs $33,000 a year to go to a private school and the public school is so difficult to get into, it is something that we have to address. And, affirmative action address those concerns. Unfortunately, 209 is something that has put that on a back burner. You have outreach, but you don't necessarily have the kind of programs that made it possible for our universities to become representative of the population. And it's all the outside or external factors, as well as a lot of internal factors that coming together is something that must be addressed. And we have to address it in a real way. People who are concerned about policy and concerned about really the human condition and the condition of African Americans in our society. How do we do it? Obviously, we have to look closely at the whole education system. Obviously, we have to look at the dynamics of competition and of the economics. Because, you know what, it's not just, when you say the economics, you have to get over into how do we get the jobs and the positions. And I have to tell you, one of the things, I serve on MTA, Metropolitan Transit Authority. We're getting ready to build the Expo line, which will go down Exposition. Anytime we start one of those construction projects, the first thing I ask is, where will you get the labor force to build that project? We have a contractor. The contractor comes in. But will that contractor have a labor force that represents the community? And I have to be careful, I have to say the entire community. Not necessarily proportionately in the community, but the entire community. And that, again, we get in the past by having the kind of affirmative action programs or outreach programs or requirements for federal money in the past, you could set up, and I've been able to set up in any number of projects, programs where we had outreach to bring in minorities who may not necessarily have had the expertise in terms of construction, but apprenticeship programs so that they had a chance to come in, and even if they didn't work on that project, they had a chance to then move to another project because they already had the skills. That's going to be tougher this time. I've already been told by our attorneys, when we start building that expo line, we are going to have to be careful about how we set up our affirmative action. We can't call it affirmative action. We call it our outreach programs. You know, and how we set up our outreach programs, we've already been told that what we're planning to do is probably subject to being challenged in court. So these are the things that if you can't even get a position in terms of construction, and that is competitive, you know, how do we provide better opportunities? And I realize, all of you, when you get out of UCLA and you get your degrees, you are going to get a position. But it's that mass of people who are not coming into UCLA, who are not going to college, that are the challenge that we have to try to face. And I'm going to say something that's very, very controversial. I'll be another Bill Cosby for you. And one of the things that my stepdaughter is a teacher. And one of the things that she finds very, very discouraging is that in many instances, in English, teaching English or teaching courses, that sometimes the students who are just learning English do better than the African American students because they assume they know English already. They assume that they already know all of these things, and as a result, she says that in terms of their achievement, they fall behind some of those students who are learning English for the first time. And that's one of the reasons I say, and what I say is kind of controversial. You know, during my era, my parents, well, my mother had been a teacher, my dad was a janitor, but they tried to make sure that I learned English, proper English. And you know what, when I turned on the radio, you could talk about Nat King Cole, or even Bessie Smith spoke English that was English that you could put down on a piece of paper. We not only have accepted the concept that on the radio, when the kids are singing, they're singing in as worst English as they can possibly put together. And then when they go in and take a test, and they put the stuff down that they've been singing, they are not going to pass. And these are tough things that no one wants to accept. No one wants to realize, and we can have all kinds of music, but somehow you have to have an acceptance, and somewhere someone's going to have to get the necessary ability to be able to pass exams, pass an SAT, or if you don't know how to get an SAT. I have a TV program I just finished for automotive training. Now, you say, well, anybody can repair a car. Well, when I went to school and you took auto shop, you know, it was for people who could hardly get through school. Today, well, you read the manual for your automobile. Just take a look at the manual. Go down to the auto shop and see how they're repairing your car. You have to know computers. So I just had a program with some people who have an automotive training shop with Toyota. But they say they have to have students who can do 8th grade math to even be able to figure out the electronics on the car, and they have to be able to have a computer, full knowledge of a computer, to be able to even repair the car. So today, the challenges are much greater than I had, greater than maybe many people here have. But somehow, those are the challenges that we who are interested in trying to change quality of life of people, have a feeling of identification, must address. So I've talked a lot, and I'd like to ask questions. If you have questions, we have to address.
Yes. I really appreciate your comments about the crisis we're facing in terms of education, and African Americans in particular. UCLA is, in many respects, kind of the poster child for a lot of these trends. If you think about the declining numbers of African American students in recent years, particularly since the passage of Prop 209. The Bunche Center, we have a project. We got some funding from the Ford Foundation a few years ago to study the problem facing African Americans. We're something of a think tank here at the Bunche Center, and we do research that hopefully informs policy. And I guess what we pitched to Ford 3 years ago was kind of looking at both sides of the problem. I mean, clearly there's a problem with K-12 education. You know, LA Unified, I mean, right now the mayor is talking about trying to change the system and taking control of it and radically, you know, shifting the way things are constructed. We'll see where that goes, but clearly there's a problem. As you point, the dropout rate is just enormous. I think 50% for all students, right, and about 60% for black males. And then even getting out of LA Unified, getting a degree, doesn't mean you're going to be UC eligible or UC competitive. I mean, you can be eligible, but you don't have any chance of getting in because the standards are so high in terms of getting into UCLA these days. I mean, it's over a 4.0 in terms of the average GPA, and that's of course because of AP courses that a lot of students don't get an opportunity to take.
Of course.
So we have, you know, equity problems in the schools.
At Crenshaw, where I represent, fighting for accreditation, not for AP, but for just meeting accreditation.
Sure.
But they were getting accreditation.
Yeah. And so like those schools, you know, Crenshaw and Dorsey, for example, used to be feeder schools to UCLA. And there were lots of students who came here, you know, famous Bruins who, you know, contributed and still contribute to our community. And now they're sending 1 or 2 a year, you know, if they're lucky. So what I'm trying to say is we have an issue with K-12 education, but I want to posit there's also a problem with the admissions process itself. Because what we've done, I think, is over-rely upon certain types of indicators to identify merit, that, you know, someone deserves to get in. And specifically the SAT and the way it's been used. And we know the SAT has problems in terms of you know, bias against certain groups. I mean, there's been, you know, work by psychologists on what's called stereotype threat and how African American students tend to perform not as well on the exam despite, you know, their overall abilities, you know, because of sort of, I guess, images that exist out there in the culture about the inferiority of African Americans that put them under stress when they take the exam. But all that aside, as a professor who's taught for 14 years or so, I've taught students who come from a variety of places and a variety of backgrounds and who test very differently. And I have to say, and it's consistent with what the studies say, is that these exams do not predict how well students do, which of course is the only rationale for using them in the first place to determine merit. But yet we use it as if it really means something. And what we get in effect is a rigged system that's pretty much guaranteeing that certain groups are going to be underrepresented at the college level, no matter how well we prepare them. Right now at UCLA, we have the phenomenon whereby African American students graduating from private schools and, you know, really, really good suburban schools who were class president, who have a 4.1 and 1450 GPA, I mean SAT, are being rejected by UCLA, rejected by Berkeley, accepted by Harvard, accepted by Princeton, and going to the Ivies, leaving California, maybe never coming back again. So my point is there's a policy issue. We're sort of hiding behind the K-12 problem, which is a problem we have to address. But in the meantime, that's a long-term problem. That's not going to be fixed overnight. But in the meantime, we're losing a whole generation of African American students.
And that's where the whole issue, though, of balance used to come in.
Yeah. And of course, you know, affirmative action at least provides some of that. You know.
Right, and diversity, identification of diversity within the student body took care of that issue.
Yeah.
And really what has to happen is there has to be some other concept that we come up with, because just like, you know, in business, as soon as people determine that a certain stock transaction is not valid, they move to a different stock transaction. And I think we have to utilize some of that same mechanism. You move away from what you're doing and you move into a different approach. The 2% rule was supposed to take care of some of that. 2%, the top 2% of every high school. That was supposed to address that issue. Apparently, it has not worked that well, and I don't know why it did not.
Well, part of the problem is, and we've been studying that actually, in fact, we gave out a mini grant to look specifically at that problem. Part of it is in California, there's so few majority African American high schools that if you take the 2% of each high school, African Americans are still going to be overwhelmed by other groups at the other schools. And so it's a demographic problem. You know, if there were more majority African American high schools, then maybe it would make a difference for
this
this
particular
group.
And that's not going to happen.
And that's not going to happen, obviously,
No,
given the
obviously,
demographic trend.
the demographics are such that that will not happen. In fact, I guess we have two, basically, predominantly, majority African Americans.
Crenshaw and
Dorsey.
Dorsey.
Because the schools are to the south,
Yeah.
the demographics are totally different. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering, as I see it, there's an unprecedented assault on affirmative action. Are there any, is this something that will end with the Bush regime, or do you foresee it going on?
It was voted in California where Bush lost.
And the Proposition 209, is there any effort to repeal it? You know, is it seen as an insult to the black community? You know, any movement underway to deal with the devastating effects it's having on
Well, obviously there have been legal challenges that have not been totally successful. But this is where, as I say, first of all, 209 passed overwhelmingly in California. And every indication is if you put it back on the ballot, all the polls show today, that it would still pass. And the reason being that there are so many people who still believe that it's reverse discrimination. And obviously the Bush administration had nothing to do. I'm sure that they would support 209 and would like to have it more effective. Now 209 is not in place in terms of the federal government, which is what I was saying to you, is that where, as it relates to federal funds, 209 does not apply. But even on the federal level, you have an assault against affirmative action in terms of business and other things. And the court is the only place where you can determine that and where you can overturn it. And apparently the court is going to be more and more conservative rather than liberal from what we're seeing. So that's why I'm saying, I think we have to come up with a different approach, a different set of language, and a different concept. What is it? I don't have it yet. But I do believe that it's possible to draft some kind. Outreach is one thing that if we say what we carve out of that you can't prohibit outreach. Even though there have been cases they're trying to limit our outreach efforts. And outreach efforts could be in any number of ways. One of the things I know that some people are looking at is the idea of identifying a group of students, and those students, since they're identified in a lower grade, have almost got a legacy to come straight through. USC does that. And this legacy concept of where you identify at a very early age students, and those students have an ability to be admitted. Now that's one concept that people are working on. But this is where you come in. I think that we have to depend upon those who are involved in the intellectual discussion of some of these issues to come up with these new concepts. Just as affirmative action came out of the same approach. I was fortunate to be in Congress at a time when they had affirmative action for employment. So I was in a committee where they had the Alaskan pipeline being funded. So I said, well, I'll just put an amendment in that when you have the leases for the Alaskan pipeline, you have to have affirmative action and have set aside for women and minorities. No one even paid any attention because they'd never heard of it. You know, they'd heard about employment set aside, but they had never thought about a set aside in a lease for a building of a pipeline. So the people there, I didn't even have a negative vote. Not one negative vote. No one paid any attention to it. But the next time, they had a defense bill, Ron Dellums put it in the defense bill, so you had all those defense contractors who were subject to affirmative action, and they were at a set aside, and so you saw all those defense contractors coming up. So every time, the Black Caucus, every time there was a bill, we started attaching that language. But it was language I developed for something that was so obscure that no one even thought of. And that's basically some of the concepts you have to have when you're trying to overcome some of these hurdles. Yes?
Speaking of your days on the Hill, do you have any interesting anecdotes about Thurgood Marshall that you'd like to share with?
Thurgood Marshall was on the bench at that time. But I really, as a young person growing up in Los Angeles, when I was in high school, I was active, as I said, in civil rights, and I was active in NAACP. And he was the legal defense person for the NAACP on a national level. And he would come to Los Angeles and speak with us, and you'd have a huge crowd that would come to a church for a report on what was going on in those cases. And he was absolutely magnificent. Because contrary to what people see him on the court, those who only saw him on the court, he was a very homespun person, had a real individual kind of approach, and also very comical in terms of his ability to talk about the circumstances, all of which were very tragic. But he could look at those tragic circumstances he was fighting and give a very humorous approach to it. And it was part of this, I think, that caused him to be able to articulate those arguments where he was able to win all those cases in the Supreme Court. And he had a tremendous following and, real admiration. And when the time came that people were willing to accept the fact that here you have the top civil rights lawyer in the United States who should be on the Supreme Court, he was able to move into that position. But certainly a different person than that Supreme Court justice that you always saw in the black robe and who was so astute and scholarly. He was scholarly, but he was scholarly in a way that everyone could understand. Everybody in that room, whether they had a 5th grade education, they knew every legal argument he had because he was able to explain it in such a way that they understood it. Yes.
Although I imagine on a given day, more African Americans and Latinos get along than we can even imagine. We have seen recent incidents in the media, particularly in some of the county jails around black-brown tensions. And just wanted to hear what you think might be 2 or 3 of the things that we need to do immediately in terms of addressing that.
Well, I think that, yes, you have black and browns using the same facility for churches. You have neighbors who are getting along just fine. But the whole situation is a little more complex than that. And if you don't mind me taking a few minutes to talk about it. Taking the situation in the jail. The press failed to report that all of those people who attacked the black inmates were not Latino. Some of them were white. Probably part of Aryan Brotherhood. The other thing you have to face, 70% of the inmates in the jail are Latino. So what you find is you find a large percentage of the people who are there, the African Americans, are a minority. And it's impossible, let's say, to segregate them. You don't have enough to segregate people, because you want to segregate people based upon how dangerous they are. In our jails, we have a different group of people. Prison is one thing, which used to be for felons. Jail was for people who had a warrant, who didn't pay their tickets, who had drunk driving, who have 1 year or less sentence. But today in our jail, because we have all the people awaiting trial, you have a large percentage of those people have committed violent felonies, heavily gang members. Now, the other thing that was happening is that a district that I represent called Florence Firestone, there are 2 gangs, and one's the Florence gang. The other is a 79 Street Crips. And there was an altercation that came about on drugs, where basically the African American gang stole the drugs, and then the Latino gang, they did ask them for the drugs back. They did not give them back. So war broke out, and as a result, we have had so many innocent people, Latino and blacks, who have been killed out of this whole thing. It's been going on since like September of last year. We've had, and what happens, and Channel 11 even did a tape of it. I'd make that available to you if you'd like to see it, with the kind of language that everybody's saying their side, but saying we don't care who we see. We're going to kill whoever we see who's black or whoever we see is Latino. So that was what was happening on the street. What Gloria Molina and I did, we each put in $500,000 and had brought in additional deputies in that area. Now, so what happened? They picked up a lot of those parole violators. We picked up 132 guns. had 32 arrests. All those people went into jail. You think they stopped fighting? When they got into jail, it's the same fight going on that was going on in the street. So, you know, it's not simple thing of black versus brown. It's a basis of, you know, a very complex, difficult situation of where you have two fighting gangs that go in, and then you have a poor innocent guy, maybe even a gang member, who doesn't belong to either one. But he gets there and they start fighting. If he's black or if he's Latino, he's going to have to protect himself and he's got to get involved in it. So you have all of these people who were injured for no reason. And it's a difficult situation. What we're trying to do, we're putting those people we call 8s and 9s, very violent felons. We'll take the facilities we have that can be individual cells, where you put no more than 2 people in a cell. We will do that in terms of those 8s and 9s, and then we will have in dormitories people who are less violent. People say, well, why don't you separate by gangs? We don't have the capacity to separate by gangs. We just don't have that capacity, that ability to do that. So, worse than that, in our camps, it's breaking out. In our camps, at one time in the probation camps, those were kids who did something. You know, they were truant. Over a period of time, truant. Not serious enough to go to youth authority, we put them in our camps. Our camps now are made up of, for the most part, very violent people. And kids, 18 and under. We have the same problem in our camps. Our camps are 70% Latino ones. So, it's not a matter of, is there a fight going on between black and browns? No, I think black and browns are working together. But there are other things that are superimposed over that are very difficult. In schools, you know, and you say, well, the schools that broke out, not for the reasons you think. You know, I understand over there at Jefferson, you know, the athletes are attractive. Athletes are black. They start dating the Latino girls, and the Latino boys don't like it. You know, and so that's what happened at Jefferson. So it's what started out as a fight over that relationship. Everybody then gets involved. So, you know, yes, some of this is black and brown. Some of it is other factors that have nothing to do with that. Because if that was the case, you'd see people fighting every block in Los Angeles. People wouldn't be able to work. You know, I do find that people say that sometimes one group prefers others in terms of promotions in the county, and we look at that. You know, they'll say, well, all the Latinos only promote the Latinos. All the blacks only promote the blacks under them. So we have to look at all of those issues. And because those are real things. Those are things that Irish people tend to support Irish people in better positions. It's the way our society has been built. But you can't allow it to happen. So those are real kinds of things that you know come about. But, yes?
Thank you. If I may change the discussion
Sure.
a bit to go back a little bit to your district. I work for the School of Medicine here at UCLA, and we have a very large residency program at the
Yes.
Charles Drew University School of Medicine. And I've served between a lot of our very fine black physicians from that area, and it saddens me that our county hospital, Drew County Hospital, despite years of oversight and consultants and purview, is still having trouble and losing his loss of accreditation, as you know. What is the outlook? What is the future of that hospital?
It's looking good. First of all, Humphrey, the clinic, has already gained its accreditation. In Drew, most of those departments, the residents are passing, which was a concern. There is a new administrator. There had not been a permanent administrator at Martin Luther King Hospital for over 5 years. There was an interim person, he got ill, went through chemo, and then had to retire. So there had not been leadership there over a period of time. Consistent leadership. There is now a woman there, her name is Antoinette Epps. She is excellent. She came from Alabama. She had experience. She's run a hospital, and she has gained tremendous respect. And the hospital is being turned around. Now, the unfortunate thing about the hospital is there were a lot of things that had to be done. There are a lot of people who had to be terminated because there had been this idea of you just do things the way you always did them. Doctors who were not at work.
That's right.
They were out working on their practice. Attendants who, residents who say to me they didn't see an attending the whole time they were there. Those things are being corrected. Many of those people who just, well, I'm going to go to the hairdresser. You don't go to the hairdresser when you're supposed to be at work.
How did that culture arrive?
How did it arrive?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know.
This is a hospital.
I know, but sometimes people who are someplace a long time and they start getting away with things. And they say, oh, I'm going to do it, and there was people stayed there and they protected all their friends. And unfortunately, there have been a tremendous number of terminations of staff. Because you have people who are very, very sick.
Well, you have people who died, ma'am.
Yes, you have people who died. And there's some other things that are also very difficult in terms of the residents who came there. It was difficult to get residents who came, and as a result, you had residents who came from a variety of different places, for the most part foreign, not from the United States. And those foreign residents did not necessarily have the same kind of training. And that was one of the issues that had to be faced. You didn't have people who passed their residency exams, because one of the things is that if you start getting a certain reputation, you don't attract these top residents. You didn't attract the top African American residents. They went somewhere else. So, for the most part, most of the residents were people who came from other places. I start thinking maybe there was some graft that people were being paid off to come here, but that's not the case. And also, when people who come from a number of other countries, sometimes they have a different attitude toward class. There is not the same attitude toward poor people. In this country, so many people come from being poor that they understand, and they don't have this attitude in terms of I'm one class and that person's a different class. In other countries where people come from and come to the United States, many of whom have these medical degrees, there are poor people and they're the rest of us. And I've had some of the administrators who say to me, I'm going to find some American residents to come here, even if we can't attract them under some special program, where there's an understanding that poor people have to be treated the same way that everyone else has to be treated. There was some of that you cannot overlook. Now, at some point when Drew gets a better reputation, he will attract residents who are, as you say, the top students who now go into Harvard, but who would come here. But I feel really good about what's happening here. Now, the trauma center, you can't get the trauma center back until you get accreditation.
I guess what my feelings are in so many is that it's the hospital for that county.
That's right.
And truly, it's a shame that they can't get top residents, because you're not going to find a better trauma center. You get so much great emergency medical experience there. So it's just such a shame that that had to be shut down.
Oh, it's not shut down.
Temporarily.
The trauma center was closed.
Yeah.
But the emergency room is seeing people, that probably some that should be in trauma. But the emergency room is still operating. But it has been downsized. And there are many departments that are not functioning because we lost surgery. Lost surgery for a reason that, again, no one could excuse. Because they received letters after letters after letters that people just put in their desk, it was just, it's just unfortunate. But that surgery can come back once the accreditation is established. Yes?
We know you
And
have
I know
a-
some of you have to leave.
And we know you have a tight schedule, and we appreciate you coming out. During your long and distinguished public service career. You've had the distinction of working at the state, the federal, and the local level. Which one of those levels gave you the greatest appreciation for serving the constituents?
Well, you know, each one had a great deal to offer. Obviously, federal you enjoy because you're involved in international issues. And those are exciting, it's challenging, and those are issues that are, you know, cutting edge. And most of the federal issues are very exciting. So I enjoyed federal. Obviously, Board of Supervisors is a totally different situation. It's one thing when you're one of 5, and you're representing 2 million people, and you have, you know, a budget the size that we have of 16 billion, and when you're 1 out of 435. I mean, it's a totally different thing. Now, I'm glad I'm not there now, because you can't do anything in the Congress now if you're a Democrat. Because, first of all, the whole system's changed. When I was there in Congress, it happened to be a majority. But if you were a minority, you had a chance to introduce amendments and get involved. Today, that no longer exists. Everything goes through the Rules Committee. Today, the Democrats, you know, being the ranking minority person simply means you sit over here and you get to ask questions. When it comes down to drafting the bills, everything is done from the president on down, and if they disagree with the president, the Rules Committee and those people, and Hassett, those people who are running the Congress, they decide. It's a totally different system. But, and on the state legislature, you know, again, it was totally something that you could really get your teeth in, and I was able to get a lot of legislation through. I've been fortunate. I was on the Appropriation Committee in Congress. So I've been really fortunate in terms of my whole experience, whether it was federal, state. I enjoy the Board of Supervisors. It's a real ability to do things, but the problems are horrendous. And the money's not there all the time. Not that money could solve all of them, but the money is not there commensurate with the kind of problems. The problems start in Los Angeles, then they spread across the country. But that gives you an opportunity to come up with a solution that then is utilized across the country. And I think that's what everyone's talking about, the homeless situation. They're solving that in New York, and we're having to then copy it, which is not the way it usually happens. Yes?
Yes, ma'am. With regards to the black-brown situation, are there any proposals or solutions that have been proposed? You know, I'm originally from the East Coast, where such tensions really don't exist. Are the children attending the same schools, or are they segregated by neighborhood or region?
No. My district is predominantly Latino. In most of the schools in my district, and I represent 2 million, in most of those schools, it's predominantly Latino, but there are blacks and browns in the school. Crenshaw, which is the largest African-American numbers, still substantial Latino population. Substantial Latino population. And that's what I'm trying to get over to you. All the schools, if there was a problem, all the schools would be closed down. Because all of them are heavily Latino. The population of the 600,000 people who are in the public school system in Los Angeles, of that, 60% or more than that are Latino. Probably 70% are Latino. So everywhere, blacks and browns are working together, living together, going to school together. Martin Luther King Hospital does not serve a black constituency. Martin Luther King Hospital, for the most part, has Latino patients. So it's a situation where it's not something that happens every day. It's not something that's common. It's not something that's happening because, again, the churches. You'll have a church that historically has been an African-American church. Today, part of those services, they let the Latinos church use that same sanctuary. I have one church in my district that has 5 different services. One that's English, one that's for Filipinos, one that's Koreans, and then one that's Latino. So you have all of these, and that's just one church, and they different hour with a different minister for each hour. But it's all part of the Methodist Church up there on Wilshire. So, no, people do get along. But that's what I'm trying to get over to you. They're there are extenuating circumstances when you read about these things. Now, I happen to put on a quinceañera for foster children. And, but we have it black and brown or white, whoever is a foster child who wants to participate. And it's just like any other quinceañera that's in any Latin community. They have the dresses, we have people who raise the money so that they can have beautiful gowns and crowns, and we have candle lighting. Of course, they don't have a parent. We get someone to come in and light a candle for them, for their quinceañera. And we have, the escorts are black or brown. And everybody, it's really, you know, people get along fine. It isn't, but you do have these situations. You have big fighting going on between the black and brown gangs. Yes.
Last question on this subject. Are there historical, there are no historical conflicts between these two groups? There are no history of competition for jobs between...
There is no history. No, there's no history. There is a competition today. There is a competition for jobs, but it is not such a competition may have something to do with the percentage of African Americans who are unemployed. Because there are certain positions that traditionally were held by blacks that for the most part today are held by Latino, mostly people who are being paid less money. You know, and as I say, that, you know, if you look at the county of Los Angeles, if you have a county job that is a janitor, you will have it diverse. Black, brown, Filipino, diverse. When you contract that out, that contractor will for the most part hire people who are undocumented. So I'm not going to tell you there's not competition for jobs. There is competition for jobs. But it's not at the point of war and fighting. Because it's also this whole issue of, in some instances, that some of these job changes have just come about as a result of changes in terms of population, education of population. Others, it's different. Waiters. In Los Angeles, waiters were African American. Tradition. Today, we have special programs to make sure there are blacks who get to be waiters, because often the hotels do not hire them. So you have special programs that make contracts with those hotels to say that they will hire those people who go through that waiting program. So it's not a matter that it's true. There is competition for jobs. There for certain jobs, not for migrant workers, for farm workers. I don't think there's, even though traditionally African Americans did a lot of farm work, today I don't think there's competition. I think that is an area where basically the undocumented are the people that are taking those jobs, and there's nobody fighting to get them.
Which leads to a final question from me. What about the issue of immigration? Should the black community support the Mexican farm workers and
Traditionally, the black African American community has always supported the farm workers. Always supported. Traditionally, first of all, it's a very complex thing, because if you're talking about the illegals, if you're in Florida, they're Haitian. So and when you're talking about the whole issue of, you know, you may see one group of people out there marching, but if you have a mechanism of people coming and have an opportunity to become legal, that's going to apply to all the Africans who are here, all the Chinese, all the Jamaicans, and particularly huge numbers of all those Haitians. So you will find, I think, that most of the African Americans will be taking a position that people should have an ability to become citizens. You notice that you haven't heard the Black Caucus say a word, have you?
not in the black community has been silent on this issue. Right?
That's right. I think it's been silent for the most part, and they look and find immediately one person to say I'm against it. Because most people realize this is a multicultural issue.
Yeah, we keep hearing about the South, illegal aliens coming from the South, but I never hear anything about Canada. Canadians coming
Right.
in here that are illegal. Is there documentation about the percentage of illegal aliens from Canada in the country?
There are certainly illegal aliens from Canada, but traditionally, the number of Canadians who come in with visas. But I have known of Canadians who came in illegally, and I've also known of Canadians who've been sent back. But they do, it's easier for them to get visas because the numbers who are applying are so few. Plus, people come over and then they go right back from Canada. And because there's large numbers of people. The thing that they're most concerned about are really is the Homeland Security issue as it relates to Canada and that border. Remember, that's where they caught the man who was getting ready to bomb LAX. So the Canadian borders where they have been really concerned, and it's really strict now. Plus, you know, it's not as easy to get across from Canada to the United States as it is from Mexico. Yes.
I've done some work with the Interagency Gang Task Force, and actually used to work in the camps. I actually grew up in Florence, Firestone.
Okay.
Those new street signs are really nice that you put up. But my question is, in talking with law enforcement, district attorneys, you know, in general, I think everyone agrees now that suppression is not enough to handle the gang problem. And just wanted to hear your thinking on what other things need to be done. Clearly, you talked about the schools and what needs to be done there, but are there other things that should be happening?
I think that you have to intervene at a very young age. Very young age. If you could get at below elementary school, if you could convince the young people at elementary school that it was not necessary for them to go into a gang, then I believe that that would be a place. But you know, there's a website with baby bibs for the Friends gang. They have a total website for all kinds of baby bags and everything with your Friends sign on. And there is tremendous reaction to anyone who goes in and tries to take out a gang member and convince that person to leave. But if you get, first of all, if you can convince the parents that it's not going to be good for their children to get involved in a gang, and they don't need that for protection. Many young people go into the gang because they don't feel that they can get by themselves unless they have some peers to give them protection. And somehow that, you have to address that at a very young age. And you have to convince parents, because you can't tell me that all these parents don't know the kids have guns in the room. There's no way that you can convince me. And there has to be a penalty. You have to have truancy issues too. You have to enforce making sure that everyone goes to school.
And I hear the gangs are now using MySpace as well, posting pictures and setting up
Right,
media.
but they have their own websites, you know, and selling their own merchandise, because when you have that many people, you have people who want to make money and who will sell them caps and all of those things to make money off of it, you know. I mean, but I was shocked with the baby bibs.
Yeah.
You know, I really didn't think anybody would have been. But we have it. Let me tell you, we do have events in our district at the parks. For instance, the 89th Street gang, they want to have their picnic on August 9th. And we make it available, the park available for them as long as they don't cause a problem. And their whole family comes. But they can't go off of the park and cause problems somewhere else, and we have lots of officers around. But you have to recognize that this is more than just a few guys gathering around the park. These are people who have children, and they have parents, and they have a whole, and we recognize that, allow them to have their events that are family events within the park.
Last question? I think we're running.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You mentioned quinceañeras for foster kids.
Yes.
What other ways is your office supporting foster families and foster kids who are in your district?
Well, we have one program initially funded by a foundation, which attempts to get parents, foster parents, from the churches. And we call it family to family, bringing in foster parents. We also have educational programs for foster parents. But I think we're very fortunate that we have an excellent director came here from Minnesota, Dr. Sanders. And he has emphasized the whole concept of family preservation, making sure that every child, when they come into that system, that family has to go through an evaluation of what kind of needs there are, and the child gets all of those needs in terms of whether it's psychological needs, or and if the parents need parenting, or psychological, or alcoholic, whatever it is, that they get those kind of services. But we have a very active program in terms of foster children. I have fishing here, and bring foster children and to Kennehawn Park, have 400 of them there. And the seniors, we stocked the park, the lake with catfish, and the seniors actually fillet the fish for them. I have beach parties for the foster children. And I go down to lifeguards, take them out, and they learn how to surf. We have 300 or 400 of them during the summer at our beach park. During Christmas, we have, of course, large Christmas events, depending on their age. For the first time this time, we had children of inmates, and we had a Christmas party for children of inmates, and that went over very well, providing them with toys and clothes. Thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking Supervisor Burke.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
Yeah.
See you this